My name is Myra Lawson. I'm 33 years old, and the night before my wedding, my father's lawyer called me at 2 in the morning and told me to cancel everything. He said my dad had just signed documents that would destroy my life, that my father had moved my late mother's trust fund into my stepsister's name. Then his voice dropped low, like he was afraid the phone itself was listening, and he said the words I still hear in my sleep. That's not the worst part. Check your fiancé's bank account. What I found on that screen put me on my kitchen floor in my pajamas at 2:20 in the morning, on what was supposed to be my wedding day. But here's what none of them knew. My mother had left me one door out, and what I did in the next 14 hours changed 4 lives forever. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where family secrets come to light and the quiet ones finally speak. If you've ever been the one who held your family together while they held you for granted, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you'll want to hear how this one ends. Let me back up to 2:04 a.m. I was awake anyway. Nurses don't sleep well the night before anything important. We lie there running checklists. The phone lit up with a number I didn't know, and I almost let it go to voicemail, because who calls a bride at 2 in the morning except a robot selling car warranties? I picked up on the 4th ring. The voice on the other end was old, rough, and completely steady, the way surgeons sound when the news is bad. Myra, this is Edwin Cole. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I said I was listening. He said, cancel everything. Your father just signed documents that will destroy your life. I actually laughed. I remember thinking this was the strangest scam script I'd ever heard. I said, what documents? And he whispered, he transferred your trust fund to your stepsister. But that's not the worst part. Check your fiancé's bank account. I told him I was hanging up. I told him scammers should at least wait until business hours. He didn't argue. He just said, quietly, your mother's anniversary is March 9th. She kept her wedding veil in a cedar chest, and she made me promise to watch over you. I drafted that promise myself, 12 years ago, at her kitchen table, while you were at nursing school. My mouth went dry. Nobody knows about the cedar chest. Not Grant. Not my father's new wife. I sat up in the dark of my apartment, alone, because tradition says the groom stays away the night before, and I heard myself ask him what I was supposed to check. He said, the paperwork your father filed came with its own emails, Myra. People forget what they forward. One of them mentions payments to a Grant Mercer. Is there an account you can look at right now? There was, so I opened it. Grant and I opened that account 8 months ago. Wedding fund, house fund, our future in one tidy number. I had the app on my phone like any other bill I managed. My thumb was shaking so hard I typed the passcode wrong twice. Then the screen loaded and there it was, sitting on top of the deposit history like it had every right to be there. 2 transfers, 3 weeks apart, $18,000, then $10,000 more. Both from the same sender, Lawson HTG and Air LLC. Memo line, both times, Consulting. That's my father's company. My father owns a heating and air business with 6 trucks and his name on the door, and my fiancé is a mortgage loan officer who has never held a wrench in his life. $28,000 of consulting. Grant had told me that money was his savings. He'd stood in our kitchen with his coffee and said, babe, I've been putting away for the down payment since before I met you, and I had squeezed his hand and felt lucky. My legs stopped working. There's no graceful way to say it. I slid down the cabinet to the kitchen floor and sat there with the phone glowing in my face, and for a second the edges of the room went soft and gray and I had to put my head between my knees. I've told strangers their husbands were dying. I've held hands through the worst nights of people's lives without blinking. But the floor of my own kitchen is where my knees finally quit. Edwin's voice came from far away, still on speaker, still patient. Myra, are you there? I said yes. He said, then I need to tell you why your father is paying your fiancé. First I asked the obvious question. If he was my father's lawyer, why was he calling me at all? Wasn't this the kind of thing lawyers went to jail for? Edwin made a sound that was almost a laugh. I was never your father's lawyer, Myra. I was your mother's. She named me trust protector when she set up your fund. My duty was never to Dale. It was to your mother's wishes. And to you. He explained it the way you'd explain medication to a scared family. Slow, plain, no big words. When my mom died 12 years ago, her life insurance and the money from my grandparents' land went into a trust. Just over $300,000 back then. Closer to 580 now. My dad was the trustee, the man holding the keys. I was the only beneficiary. And there was one line in that trust I had never paid attention to. The whole thing paid out to me directly when I turned 35. Or on the day I got married. Whichever came first. I stared at the wedding dress hanging on my closet door. The wedding, I said. The wedding is the deadline. Yes, Edwin said. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, your father stops being the man with the keys. So yesterday afternoon, at 4:12, he signed paperwork moving everything into a brand new trust. It's called the Lawson Family Legacy Trust. The named beneficiaries are his descendants and step-descendants. In practice, that means Brianna, my stepsister, who has never once asked me for anything. The transfer settles Monday morning, he said. The bank's compliance office had copied him on the instructions a few hours ago because my mother, my careful, quiet mother, had written that rule in herself. Which raised a question I couldn't let go of. What exactly had my mother been afraid of? My mother's name was Ellen. She was a school librarian in Marion, Ohio, for 22 years, and she smelled like old paperbacks and fabric softener, and she never in her life raised her voice at me. When I was 17 and my cousin got a car for graduation and I got a bus pass, I sulked for a week. Mom sat me down at the kitchen table and said the sentence I'd hear 100 more times before she died. We don't keep score in this house. She said love that keeps score isn't love, it's bookkeeping, and she refused to run her home like a bank. The cancer came the spring I turned 20. Ovarian. She had 18 months, and she spent an ungodly amount of that time on paperwork. I used to get angry about it. I wanted her on the porch with me, and she was at the table with folders. She sold her parents' farmland that fall. She met with a lawyer named Edwin Cole 4 times that I knew of, probably more that I didn't. Once I heard her on the phone saying, firm as concrete, "No, Edwin, you. It has to be someone who doesn't owe Dale anything." At the time, I thought nothing of it. She was 49 when she died, and I was 21. And I would have traded every dollar of that trust for one more ordinary Tuesday with her. It took me 12 years and one phone call in the dark to understand what she'd been doing at that table. My mother wasn't planning her death. She was reading the room she'd lived in for 25 years, and she was building me a door out of it. She just never told me what she saw coming through the other one. Here's what happened to our family after the funeral. I became the staff. Not overnight. It creeps. Dad's roof started leaking the winter I finished nursing school, and I paid for it, because I had a signing bonus and he had a business in a rough patch. I turned down a job in Columbus 40 minutes away, because Grandma Lawson needed rides to her heart appointments and somebody had to take her. Somebody meant me. 3 years after Mom died, Dad married Carla. She came with a boutique downtown, a laugh you could hear across a parking lot, and a daughter named Brianna. 18 then, quiet, always half hiding behind her phone. I tried with them. I genuinely did. I did Thanksgiving at their house. I helped Brianna move into her first apartment. I smiled through Carla redecorating my mother's living room in colors Mom would have hated. And every Christmas, my father handed out envelopes. The year I paid for his roof, Brianna's envelope was thicker than mine. I know because she opened hers next to me on the couch, and I saw. And my father saw me see. He wasn't even embarrassed. He shrugged, comfortable as a man in his own recliner, and said, "You were always fine." That was the whole explanation. You were always fine. I took it as a compliment for years. I filed it next to Employee of the Month. Myra the Reliable. Myra who doesn't need. Myra, the human backup generator. There in every outage and forgotten every sunny day. I thought being fine was the same as being loved. It took one phone call at 2 in the morning to teach me the difference. I met Grant Mercer 2 years ago across a desk with my mortgage application on it. I was buying a little house on Cherry Street. That fell through later, but that's how we met. He wore a navy tie and he explained interest rates like he actually wanted me to understand them. And when I said something dry about hospital coffee, he laughed at the right part. He was careful with money. That was the thing I loved first, I'm not ashamed to say it. I'd spent my 20s patching other people's leaks. Here was a man with a budget spreadsheet and a retirement plan. He proposed last spring at Mirror Lake, on one knee on the dock, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to be fair to the woman I was, so let me tell you what I did notice. About a year in, I saw a betting app on his phone. Bright green, little racing numbers. I asked him about it straight out. I'm not a woman who hints. He didn't flinch. He said he'd messed around with it in his 20s, that it got away from him for a while, and that he was done. And he pulled up his credit report right there at the dinner table. Clean. Scores in the high 700s, no collections, nothing. I checked, is my point. I asked the question and I demanded the receipts, and the receipts were spotless. What I could not have known, what no bride could have known, was that the report was telling the truth and still hiding everything. Money owed to an offshore betting site never touches a credit report. There is no bureau for bookies. I asked the right question and demanded the right document, and the document was built in a way that could not contain the answer. 3:15 a.m. Edwin had said one more thing before we hung up. Find your copy of the prenup packet. 9 days before the wedding, Grant had come home with a blue folder from a law office in Columbus. Standard stuff, he said. Prenup like we talked about. Some estate acknowledgments. Sign at the tabs, honey. And here's the part that will live in me forever. I read it. I was 11 hours into a 12-hour shift's worth of tired, but I sat at our kitchen table and I read, because I am the woman who checks medication doses twice, even when the pharmacy already checked. It looked right. Real firm, real letterhead, page numbers marching along the bottom, a table of contents that matched every tab. I signed where the little arrows pointed. Grant said the notary would stamp it at his office in the morning. Mortgage offices have notaries the way hospitals have hand sanitizer. Now I spread my copy across the same table and went page by page against the table of contents. Page 12, page 13, page 15. I went through it 3 times, the way you count pills when the count is wrong and you can't believe it. My copy had no page 14. The table of contents said page 14 existed. Beneficiary acknowledgement. And in the stack they'd handed me back, it simply wasn't there. I had signed a page I would never have signed awake and rested. And then, they had taken it out of my hands. Me. The double checker. At 3:30 my phone buzzed on the table and I flinched like it was hot. Grant. Can't sleep. Can't wait to marry you tomorrow. I read it standing over the folder he'd built to rob me. At 4 in the morning, Edwin sent me an email with no message in the body, just a forwarded chain from the bank's compliance office. I've noticed people never scroll to the bottom of their own forwards. They send the whole history along like a tale they forgot they had. The top of the chain was boring. Transfer instructions, account numbers with X's in them, a lawyer's signature block from a firm in Columbus I'd never heard of. I scrolled. Under the legal talk was an older thread, plain as a grocery list, between my father's business email and an address I knew better than my own. G. Mercer. My father wrote like he talks. No punctuation to spare. Papers are done on my end. Get hers signed this week. Grant's reply. Working on it. She reads everything. My father. Then pick a long shift day. And then, at the bottom, dated 9 days ago, the sentence I read standing up and then sat down to read again. Last payment clears when the consent is filed. Keep her calm until Saturday. I read it 3 times. Keep her calm. That was the job my father hired my fiancé to do. Not love me, not build a life with me. Keep her calm until Saturday. The way you'd keep a patient calm before a procedure they haven't consented to. $28,000, and the last installment was contingent on my signature reaching a filing cabinet. I sat in my kitchen while the sky started to go gray at the edges, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very cold. And if you've ever been there, you know that quiet is not weakness arriving. It's arithmetic finishing. I called Edwin back at 4:30 and asked him to explain it all to me like I was a family member in a waiting room. He was good at that. Better than most doctors I know. Think of your mother's trust as a pitcher, he said. Your father was allowed to hold the pitcher. He was never allowed to own the water. What he did yesterday is called decanting. He poured your mother's pitcher into a new jug with someone else's name on it. The law allows it in some cases, he said, but not the way Dale did it. Dale's shiny new Columbus lawyers knew the move was ugly, so they armored it with one document, a beneficiary consent, release, and indemnification. Signed by me, my actual signature, my actual pen, page 14 of a blue folder. A real signature is a real problem, Edwin said, not sugarcoating it. To undo it, you'd have to swear out an affidavit that it was obtained by fraud. Against your father, against Grant. On the record, in this county, with your last name on every page. Then he let the silence sit for a second, and he told me the other half. My mother hadn't just named him as a watcher. She'd given the trust protector teeth, the power to remove a trustee without a courtroom. Same day, with a signed instrument and written notice to the bank. Dale's lawyers either never read her trust closely or never believed an old man would use it. Your mother didn't leave you money, Myra, Edwin said, and his rough old voice cracked just slightly in the middle of it. She left you a door. But I want you to hear me. The door only opens from your side. I asked him what walking through it would cost. He said, everything the wedding was supposed to buy. Here's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. The first question isn't how could you, it's why now. So I sat with my cold coffee and did what I do at work when a chart doesn't add up. I stopped looking at the numbers and started looking at the dates. Carla's boutique had closed 2 years ago. Retiring from retail, she'd called it, with the parking lot laugh. But I'd driven past the empty storefront and seen the paper in the window, and it wasn't a thank you note to loyal customers. It was a notice from a bank. My father had co-signed that dream. I knew because I'd been at the dinner where he announced it like a man buying a boat. And last fall, Brianna's little Honda got replaced by a newer one, financed, I now realized, through nobody's salary. That made sense. Dad had also stopped complaining about business. Men like my father complain about business the way other people talk about weather. When the complaining stops, the weather's gotten too bad to mention. The new trust was named for Brianna's future. I'd bet my license the money was aimed at my father's past. The second mortgage, the co-signed loans, the whole Carla's boutique had chewed in him. Brianna's future wasn't the destination. It was the label on the box. And that made it worse, not better. My stepsister, 27 years old, working the front desk at a dental office and staying out of everyone's way, had been drafted into a robbery as its cover story. I remember thinking, with that cold arithmetic still running, does she even know? And then the clock on my stove said 4:50, and I decided the man with the tuxedo hanging in his brother's guest room could answer his questions first. Grant's brother lives 10 minutes from me, in a duplex with a porch light that's been burned out since Easter. I knocked at 5 in the morning, still in yesterday's clothes, and when Grant opened the door in his undershirt with his hair flat on one side, for a half second his whole face lit up, like this was romance, like I couldn't wait either. Then he saw my eyes and the light went out of him floor by floor, like a building shutting down for the night. I didn't yell. I put my phone up, screen out, the deposit history glowing between us. $28,000 of consulting, I said. Walk me through the consulting. He held the doorframe and tried the first lie. That it was a loan from my dad for our house, that he'd wanted to surprise me. It lasted maybe 40 seconds, and then it fell apart. Because I just stood there and let it. Silence is the best scalpel I own. It all came out on that dark porch in pieces. The betting app hadn't stayed in his 20s. $60,000 deep, hiding it, drowning. And last fall, Terrified that mortgage underwriters would someday see the monthly bleed in his statements, Grant had gone to my father, man to man, don't tell Myra, to ask for a quiet bridge loan. He handed Dale the leverage himself. My dad didn't warn me. He drove to Grant's office, closed the door, and made him an offer. The debt paid, quietly, plus a little more. In exchange, one signature from me, collected at home. No questions, no drama. He told me the trust was gone either way, Grant said, and here's the sentence I'll never forget. The one he offered up like it would help. Myra, it wasn't about you. It wasn't about you. Men always say that like it's a bandage, and it's always the deepest cut in the drawer. I stood on that porch and looked at the man I'd picked out dishes with, and I watched him understand, in real time, that the wedding was dissolving between us. And then I watched him get smart. Grant is very good at pivoting. It's what made him top producer 3 years running. He lowered his voice into the warm register, the closing register. Okay. Here's what we do. We get married today, exactly like we planned. Then Monday, we lawyer up. You and me, Myra, as husband and wife, and we go after your dad together. I'll testify. I'll hand over every text. He bribed me. That's a crime. We'll own him. But if you cancel today, you're alone. And he wins. I want to be honest with you. For about 10 seconds that offer had a shape to it. It sounded like not being alone. It sounded like salvage. That's the thing about people who are good with money. They can make you a payment plan for anything, even your own dignity. Then I heard it for what it was. You'd testify against the man who paid you, I said, for a cut of what's left. He blinked, and in the porch dark I saw the tiny flinch of a salesman whose customer has read the fine print out loud. I took the ring off. He reached for it and I closed my fist and put it in my jacket pocket instead. I wasn't ready to hand it over, not yet, and I couldn't have told you why. I walked back to my car through the wet grass. One down. The hard one was still asleep in his bed. I drove back to my apartment as the sky went from gray to the color of skim milk. I had 90 minutes before I could decently bang on my father's door, and I spent them doing something I can't fully explain, except that my feet took me there. At the foot of my bed sits my mother's cedar chest. Her mother's before her. The hinges sing one long note when you lift the lid, and the smell inside is 1975 and every good thing. On top, folded in tissue paper I replaced every year like a ritual, was her wedding veil. Ivory, fingertip length, a little foxed at the edge where her mother had pressed it wrong in 1978. I was supposed to wear it at 4 o'clock. We'd planned it, Mom and I, in the last months. One of those deals you make with a dying woman where you both pretend the future is a sure thing. I sat on the floor and held it for a long time, and then I folded it back into its tissue, laid it in the chest, and closed the lid. The latch has a small brass lock, and the key had lived in the junk drawer for a decade. I went and got the key. I locked the chest, and I threaded the key onto the chain around my neck. Next to nothing, so I'd feel it all day. Not this wedding, I told her, out loud, in an empty apartment. Like a crazy person. Maybe not any. But you don't get to be there for this one, and this one doesn't get to touch anything of yours. I stood up off the floor a different weight than I'd sat down. Grief does that sometimes. It stops being water and becomes a spine. Before I tell you what I found in my father's kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, if you've ever been the one your family calls the strong one, the one who's always fine, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And subscribe, because what my father said over that coffee cup is something I'll never forget. My parents' back door hasn't locked properly in 30 years. You lift the handle and lean. I did, quiet out of habit, and stopped in the doorway. Dale Lawson was already up. Of course he was. The man has opened his shop at 7 since before I was born. He sat at the kitchen table in the circle of light from the stove hood, work shirt on, coffee going cold in front of him, and next to the coffee lay an envelope with a bank's name in the corner and the word "Notice" showing through the plastic window. Foreclosure paper. I know the look of them. You see everything in an ICU waiting room. He didn't hear me at first, and for a moment I just watched my father be old. The light took 10 years it usually loaned him. He had his reading glasses pushed up on his head, and his thumb was moving over the envelope's torn edge, back and forth, like a man rubbing a coin for luck. When he finally saw me, he didn't startle and he didn't reach to hide the envelope, which told me he was past hiding. Your grandfather, he said, instead of good morning, sold my mother's piano the winter the harvest failed. She loved that piano more than she loved him, probably. Nobody called it stealing. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. They called it Tuesday. That's what a man does, Myra. He uses what the family has. And God help me, for about 30 seconds, standing in my dead mother's kitchen, I felt sorry for him. 30 seconds. Then he kept talking, and he cured me, because my father did not apologize. It never once crossed the county line of his mind that morning. He explained, patiently, reasonably, in the voice he uses to tell customers their compressor is shot. And every sentence was a brick in a wall I'd been living behind my whole life without seeing it. Your mother's money was always family money, he said. She'd have wanted it working, not sitting in some account gathering dust while you play nurse and pay your own bills just fine. He said the business had 2 bad years. He said Carla's shop wasn't her fault. The economy did it. He said Brianna was 27 with no degree and no start, and a girl like that needs a runway. And then he looked at me, his firstborn, the one who paid for the roof over his head, standing in front of him in yesterday's clothes with his betrayal loaded on her phone, and he delivered the family motto like a blessing. You were always fine. There it was. The whole religion in one line. Being fine was my crime. I had committed competence, 33 years of it, and the sentence was, everything you have is surplus, and surplus belongs to the family, and the family is whoever is standing closest to your father when he's afraid. I didn't argue with any of it. You don't argue with a belief system at 6:40 in the morning. I asked him one question, level as a bubble in glass. Did you pay Grant? And my father, looked down into his coffee cup like the answer was printed on the bottom, and the stove clock hummed, and he didn't say no. What he finally said was worse than no. He looked up, and he'd found his footing again, the way he always does, and he said, I helped the boy with a debt so he could start clean with you. Call it a wedding gift. A wedding gift? $28,000 to my fiancé to keep me calm and harvest my signature, filed under gifts, in the ledger where my father keeps his soul. I actually felt the room tilt a little, and I put my hand on the counter, and that's when the hallway floor creaked. Carla stood in the doorway in her rose-colored robe, hair pinned, face done enough to tell me she'd been awake a while. She'd been listening from the hall. And here's the detail I'll carry to my grave. She wasn't surprised. Not by any of it. She looked at me the way you look at a delivery that's arrived earlier than scheduled. Inconvenient, but expected. We were going to tell you after the honeymoon, she said. Gently. Like a kindness. We. Going to tell you. After. Every word of that sentence was a door closing somewhere in the house of my life. There had been meetings about me. There had been a plan, with phases, and a communication schedule, and my honeymoon was on it as a buffer period. My father, my stepmother, my fiancé, a law firm in Columbus, a notary I'd never met. An entire committee had convened around my future, and the only person who'd never been invited into the room was me, the peacemaker, the one who did Thanksgiving at their house. I looked from her to him, and I asked the only question left standing. Does Brianna know? Carla's chin came up an inch, and she didn't answer. And that was an answer too. I just couldn't read it yet. My father stood up then, and he became the version of himself the town knows. Dale Lawson, sponsor of the Little League team, firm handshake, everything under control. Here's what's going to happen, sweetheart, he said, and the sweetheart landed like a hand on the back of my neck. You're going to go home and get some sleep and marry that boy at 4 o'clock, because 180 people are coming and half of them are my customers. You sign nothing, you say nothing. Monday, we all sit down as a family and sort this out like adults. And the fog I'd been standing in for 4 hours burned off all at once because I finally saw the shape of the whole machine. They needed the wedding. Not wanted, needed. The moment I said I do, Mom's trust paid out and closed, and it would pay into whatever mess Dale's paperwork had already made, and untangling fraud from a terminated trust would take lawyers years and cost more than it saved. The marriage was the getaway car. And the 180 guests, the pastor, the customers, the neighbors, my whole ICU shift in their good dresses, they weren't witnesses to my happiness. They were a wall I'd never climb over. Who accuses her own father of fraud on her wedding day, in front of the entire town? A hysterical bride. That's who. They were counting on my silence the way they'd counted on it for 12 years, because keeping the peace was my job in this family, and I had never once missed a shift. I didn't answer him. I walked out the broken back door and sat in my car in their driveway, and my phone buzzed. Edwin. There's something else in the file. Come now. Edwin Cole's office is over a florist's shop downtown, and at 8 on a Saturday morning he met me at the street door in a cardigan with his tie knotted wrong, which somehow made me trust him more. His office smelled like paper and pipe smoke from 1990. He had the decanting file spread across his desk, and he put one page in front of me and set a magnifying glass on it like this was an old movie. "Look at the notary block," he said. "Page 14. My signature. Mine. No forgery. That would have been easier to swallow. But below it, a notary's stamp and a certificate swearing that I had personally appeared before her and signed in her presence, with a date and a time of day typed right in. I read the name. The notary was a woman from Grant's office. I'd met her at his Christmas party. She does the closings. And I had never stood in front of her in my life. "Check the date," Edwin said. I did, and I laughed. One short, ugly laugh. The certificate put me in a mortgage office on a Tuesday morning, and on that Tuesday morning I had been on the unit for 12 straight hours, covering half of a colleague's shift on top of mine. Badge scans, time clock, charting with my name stamped on it every 15 minutes all day long. A hospital is one giant alibi machine. "She notarized a signing that never happened," Edwin said. "That's not sloppy, Myra. That's notary fraud. A crime with her name on it, and everyone who arranged it standing in a chain behind her." For the first time since 2:04 a.m., the ground shifted under someone else's feet instead of mine. I sat back, and Edwin folded his hands and said, "Now, let me tell you the price of using it." He laid 2 documents side by side on the desk, squaring their corners, an old man's tidiness. "This one," he said, touching the first, "removes your father as trustee. Your mother gave me that power. No courtroom, no waiting. I sign as protector. You consent as beneficiary. The bank locks everything the minute it lands. The transfer dies Monday morning in its sleep." His finger moved to the second. "This one is your affidavit. It says your consent on page 14 was obtained by fraud. Without it, your signature stands, and some judge someday untangles it. Maybe. With it, the consent is dead. But Myra, understand what it is. You will be swearing, on the record, in the county where your father coaches Little League, that Dale Lawson and Grant Mercer defrauded you. It will be public. It may bring in the prosecutor whether you want him or not. There is no version where you sign this and still get walked down an aisle by your father. Not today. Possibly not ever." He took off his glasses and rubbed the dents they'd left. "Your mother made me promise to watch, and I've watched. But she couldn't sign this for you, and neither can I. The door only opens from your side." I looked at the 2 pages. 30 grams of paper, maybe. I've handed people heavier consent forms for a flu shot. And I understood, sitting in that room over the florist, that my whole life had been arranged so I would never sign anything like this. That "always fine" wasn't a compliment. It was offense. And every good deed I'd ever done for them was another post in it. Edwin waited. Outside, a delivery truck idled. Somewhere across town, a florist who didn't know yet was loading 180 chairs worth of roses. I told Edwin I needed an hour, and he nodded like a man who'd expected exactly that, and I went down the stairs into the morning and Brianna was leaning against my car. Dental office scrubs, no makeup, arms wrapped around herself like the parking lot was cold, which it wasn't. Carla had called her, some version of events where I was the storm about to hit the house. We stood 4 feet apart, my stepsister and I, two women who had spent 9 years being polite across a table. "Is it true you're calling lawyers on your dad?" she said. I asked her what she knew about the Lawson Family Legacy Trust, and I watched the words land on a completely blank face. And I've read 10,000 faces in that hospital, faces lying about pain, lying about drinking, lying about how the bruises happened, and I'm telling you, hers wasn't lying. She didn't know. "There's a trust with your name on it," I said, "filled with my mother's money as of 4:12 yesterday afternoon." She actually stepped back. Then her eyes went wet and furious all at once and she said, "I never asked for your money, Myra. I never asked for any of this." A beat. "But don't burn my mom's life down to feel righteous. She's not strong like you. If this goes to lawyers, it takes the house, it takes everything. You're the only one who can afford to lose." There it was again. The family arithmetic, out of the mouth of the one who'd never seen the books. Myra can afford it. Myra's the load-bearing wall. I got in my car and sat with my hands on the wheel, more alone than I have ever been at any bedside. Tessa Bright has been my charge nurse, my maid of honor, and my emergency contact for 9 years, and she showed up at my apartment at 9 with 2 coffees and her bridesmaid dress still in its plastic, because I'd texted her a single line, "Wedding may be off, don't ask yet, come." She sat on my counter and listened to all of it without one interruption, which is a skill only nurses and bartenders truly master. And then, because she knows me down to the wiring, she didn't tell me what to do. She asked me a work question. "When a family can't decide and the patient's circling," she said, "what do you tell them?" I stared at her. We both knew the speech. I've given it 100 times in a hallway that smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee, to families frozen exactly like I was frozen. Sometimes you can't save the limb and the life. Choose which one you're keeping, and choose while it's still a choice. "This is that," she said. "You've been trying to save the limb for 12 years, honey. It's the life now." I did what I do when the monitor alarms. I got quiet and I ran the sequence. Sign the removal. The money locks. Mom's picture stays mom's. Sign the affidavit. Page 14 dies. And my father's name goes on a fraud file in the county where everyone knows his trucks. Don't sign. Walk the aisle at 4. Keep the peace. Be fine forever. And let them teach me, finally and completely, what my fine was worth to them. I want to pause here, because at 10 a.m. I still had a choice, and part of me wanted to take the quiet road and keep my family. If you think I should have signed nothing and kept the peace, say so in the comments. I promise some of you will. Then stay with me, because what happened in that chapel is the part I still dream about. At 10:12 a.m., I sat back down at Edwin Cole's desk and picked up his heavy black pen. I signed the consent to remove my father as trustee of my mother's trust. My signature has been on 10,000 documents, medication orders, incident reports, a mortgage application that started this whole thing, and it never once felt like this. Edwin signed beneath me as protector, dated it, and his paralegal? Dragged in on a Saturday, bless her. Scanned it to the custodian bank's emergency line while we watched the progress bar like family outside an OR. Then the affidavit. I read every line of it twice. Obtained by fraud. Materially false notarization. My hand did not shake, which surprised me. At the bottom there was a checkbox, added by Edwin's careful hand. Request referral to county prosecutor. My pen hovered over that box for a long moment. Grant, in handcuffs. My father's name in the court reporter column of the paper his customers read at breakfast. It was right there, and I had earned it. And it would have been so easy. I left the box empty. Edwin raised his eyebrows a quarter inch. "Not because he deserves mercy," I said. "Because I decide what I carry." He nodded slowly, like I'd passed a test neither of us had named. At 10:31, the bank's confirmation pinged. Instruments received. Account frozen pending review. Trustee authority suspended. It was done. The old life ended at 10:31 on a Saturday morning above a florist shop, and no one in it knew yet but me. I turned my phone over. 14 missed calls from Dad. One voicemail, 30 seconds of breathing, and then his voice, low and final. If you do this, you have no father. At 12:30, the lobby buzzer went off, and when I looked out the window, there was Grant on the sidewalk, in the full tuxedo, holding flowers. He'd come to perform. I went down because I didn't want him in my home, and we stood in the entryway with the mailboxes, and he did the whole number, the smile, the flowers held out like a torch, the speech he'd clearly rehearsed in his brother's bathroom mirror. He loved me. Last night was the worst mistake of his life. And then, because a salesman can never resist sweetening a deal, he leaned in with the closer. I talked to your dad this morning, babe. He's willing to fix everything. The money. All of it. Back where it belongs. If we just get married today. 4 o'clock. Everybody wins. I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing move in me, and the nothing was informative. There it was. One more time, with a boutonniere on it. The wedding wasn't for me. It never had been. Not for weeks. The wedding was the last asset they needed to strip. My vows, notarized by a pastor in front of the whole town, the final signature in the folder. Even now, with the account frozen solid, my father's instinct wasn't to call his daughter and beg forgiveness. It was to send the pretty salesman to close. The account's frozen, Grant, I said. It has been since 10:31. I watched him do the math. Watched the exact second the flowers became just objects in his hand. So there's nothing left in this for you. You can go. He stood there in his rented tux with his mouth open, and I walked up my own stairs and didn't look back to see how long he stayed. Here's the part nobody expects, and I'm not sure I can fully explain it even now. At 3 o'clock, I put on my wedding dress. Alone in my bedroom, all those tiny buttons, Tessa doing up the last 6 with her jaw set like a soldier's. Not the veil. The veil was in the cedar chest, and the chest was locked, and the key hung cool between my collarbones where I could feel it. But the dress, yes. Because 180 people were driving toward a chapel at that very moment with wrapped gifts on their back seats. My great-aunt from Toledo, half my ICU in their good clothes, neighbors who'd known my mother, and none of it was their fault. They deserved to hear it from the bride, standing up, in person. Not from a text chain, not from whatever story Carla was already drafting, not from a folding sign on a locked chapel door. And I'll tell you the truer thing underneath. For 12 years I had kept every piece by disappearing, smoothing, absorbing, handling it quietly so nobody was ever embarrassed. That was my ministry, and I had just resigned. Hiding today, however gracefully, would have been one more quiet Myra move. I was done being managed and done managing. Tessa drove. I sat in the passenger seat of her Subaru in 15 pounds of ivory satin, holding no flowers, watching the corn go by, and I felt the strangest calm I've ever felt. The calm from the far side of triage, after the choice, when your hands finally stop weighing things. The chapel doors were white. My mother would have loved them. The chapel is an old country church they renovated for weddings. White clapboard, real steeple, an organ that wheezes on the low notes. By 3:30 the lot was full, and the organist was working through the prelude list, and I came in through the side door into the little vestibule, and my father was waiting for me there. Gray suit, fresh shave, boutonniere already pinned, because of course he'd dressed for the version of today where he won. He looked at me in the dress, and something crossed his face. I'll never know if it was grief or logistics. And then he reached into his breast pocket and took out a folded check and a single typed page. He held them out the way he's handed me things my whole life, like the transaction was already agreed and my hand was just late. Every cent back in the account by Wednesday, he said, low, while the organ murmured through the wall. Plus what the venue cost me. It's all written down. You withdraw that removal thing, you tear up whatever that old man had you sign, and this stays in the family. Marry him or don't. I don't even care anymore. No lawyers, Myra. Family handles family. And I want you to understand what he was offering, because I understood it completely, standing there with the organ humming and 180 programs rustling on the other side of one door. He was offering me everything I had wanted my entire adult life. The money back, the quiet, the family, intact, resealed, no scandal. My father, still my father. All of it, printed and signed for one price. The same price as always. Me, going back to being fine. I looked at the check for a long moment. His signature at the bottom, that confident tangle I used to forge on permission slips in 8th grade because he was never home to sign them. And I heard my mother's voice, so clear across 12 years that I half turned my head. I said it quietly, because the truest things don't need volume. We don't keep score in this house. That's what Mom used to say. You remember? His jaw moved. I kept going, level, unhurried, a vitals report. She meant love isn't a ledger. And you turned her dying gift into one. You priced her out. You priced me out. You put a number on your own daughter and found a buyer. Dad, you made me an entry. He started to say my name in the voice that has ended every family argument since 1995, and I did the thing I had never once done in 33 years. I kept talking. The removal stands, the affidavit stands, and I'm not tearing up anything my mother built ever again. Then I took the check from his hand. I felt him relax for half a heartbeat. The old reflex, she's taking the deal. And I folded it in half, and in half again, and I tucked it into the breast pocket of his gray suit, behind the boutonniere, and patted it flat once, the way you'd settle a crooked name tag. Keep it, I said. Buy back the house. Tell Carla I hope it works. His face was doing something I had never seen it do. Searching, actually searching, for the next move and not finding one. I stepped around my father and I put both hands on the chapel doors and I pushed them open myself. 180 faces turned. The organist stopped mid-phrase, one note hanging in the rafters like a held breath, and I walked up the center aisle alone in my dress with no veil and no flowers and no father, and you could hear satin and floorboards and absolutely nothing else. I stopped at the front, where the pastor stood with his book, and I turned around and faced them, the great aunts, the neighbors, Dale's customers, my night shift crew in their Sunday clothes, every face I'd spent a lifetime keeping comfortable. I kept it short. Bad news should be short. It's the one mercy you can always afford. There will be no wedding today, I said, and the room made that sound, that soft collective intake, and I waited for it to pass like weather. Last night I learned that people I trusted most made choices I couldn't stand beside. I won't be making vows today. That's all you need from me, and it's all you'll hear from me. No speeches, I promise. A pause, one breath. The dinner is paid for. Please stay. Eat, dance if the band's willing, and hug somebody you're honest with. Somewhere in the third row, a chair scraped, and Grant came up the side aisle. He'd slipped in the back, tux and all, and reached for the microphone stand like a man grabbing a lifeline, and said my name, wet-eyed, ready to perform devotion for the crowd one last time, because 180 witnesses were his last chance to be the heartbroken groom instead of the hired one. I didn't let him build to anything. I walked to him, took his hand, and pressed the ring into his palm, folding his fingers over it gently, a nurse returning personal effects. It wasn't about me, I said. You told me so yourself. And I watched the sentence he'd offered as a bandage come back to him as a verdict. It was my father who lost his composure in front of the town, not me. I want that on the record because for 12 years the family story was that I'd be the emotional one if the truth ever got loose. Dale came through the chapel doors I'd opened, down the center aisle, boutonniere crooked, the folded check still in his breast pocket, and his voice came apart in front of 200 years of combined acquaintance. Everything I did was for this family. It rang off the rafters the way the organ does. The room went absolutely still. His customers, his pastor, his poker friends, all watching Dale Lawson shout at his daughter in a wedding dress. And then he said it. The line he'd been saying my whole life, the one he thought was a defense. Out loud, at full volume, in front of everyone. She was always fine. I heard it move through the pews like wind through corn, because everybody in that room had watched me be fine. Fine at Mom's funeral at 21, fine paying for things, fine hosting, fine covering shifts. Fine, fine, fine. And hearing it screamed as a justification, they finally heard what it had been all along. Not praise. A price tag. Carla appeared at his elbow, white-faced, and pulled him toward the side door, and he went, still saying pieces of sentences. Brianna did not go with them. My stepsister sat down in the third pew, alone, in the family section, and stayed. And I've thought about that small act of stillness more than almost anything else from that day. At the doors, I turned back once. "I'm done paying to be loved," I said. To him. To all of it. Not loud, but the room had gone so quiet it carried to the last row. Then I walked out through the white doors into the 4 o'clock sun. Tessa found me in the parking lot, standing in the gravel in 15 pounds of satin, and she put her old cardigan from the back seat over my bare shoulders, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed managing, and it turns out that's what peace actually feels like. My phone buzzed twice against my hip, a few seconds apart, and I will tell you about both messages, because they arrived together, and they belong together. And if you understand why, you understand this whole story. The first was an email from the Custodian Bank's trust office. Automated, gray, beautiful, hold confirmed. Trustee change effective as of 10:31 a.m. pending transfer cancelled. My mother's picture, locked, safe. Hers, mine. 12 years of her careful table work and one old man's promise, holding. The second was a text from my father. "You have no father." That's the whole text. I stood there between those two screens. One told me I'd won, one told me the price. And the gravel dust drifted across the lot. And inside the chapel somebody, God bless them, had told the band to play. And you could hear the first song starting, muffled and warm, like a party on the far side of a river I had just crossed. Both things were true at once, and I let them both be true. I had saved the only thing my mother ever asked anyone to guard, and it had cost me the man who gave me her last name. Tessa looked at the phone, then at me. "You okay?" she asked, and for the first time in 12 years I told a true answer to that question. "No," I said, "but I will be. On my own books this time." She drove me home with the windows down. Here's the aftermath, and I'll keep it short, because life keeps it short. The dramatic part ends, and then there's just paperwork and Tuesdays. The consent from page 14 was voided within the month, fraud in the inducement, plus a notarization for a signing that never happened, sworn against a hospital time clock that doesn't lie. The trust got a new trustee, a bank officer in a gray cubicle who has never once called me sweetheart, which I find restful. The new trustee's first audit found what my father's vague yearly summaries had been hiding. Over the past year, he had quietly pulled just under $70,000 out of the trust, most of it the price of grant. He signed a repayment plan for every cent, secured against the business, 5 years of payments. I never checked the box for the prosecutor, and I've never regretted it. That was my choice to make, and I made it once, cleanly, on a Saturday morning above a florist. The state's notary board, though, moves on its own rails. The woman who stamped a meeting that never occurred lost her commission, and the file, as files do, slid sideways onto her employer's desk, and Grant Mercer is no longer a licensed loan officer in the state of Ohio. I didn't do that to him. He did it to himself with a rubber stamp, months before I ever knew. He texted me twice in the spring, long messages, therapy vocabulary, the word closure doing a lot of cargo work. And I read them, and I didn't answer, and the not answering wasn't rage. It was just the door, closed, from my side. Brianna texted too, 6 weeks after the chapel. I didn't know. I'm paying back the car. My choice. I wrote back. I know you didn't. Coffee sometime. We've had coffee 3 times now. It isn't sisterhood yet. It's 2 women comparing notes from inside the same weather. And honestly, it might be the only thing from that whole family I'm keeping. A year came and went. With some of Mom's money, I bought a small cottage on the lake where she used to rent a cabin every August. Nothing grand. A wood stove, a crooked porch, water the color of nickels in the evening. This past Thanksgiving I hosted Tessa and her husband, their 6-year-old Lily, 2 nurses from my unit with nowhere better to be, a table with mismatched chairs and nobody keeping track of who brought what. Before dinner, Lily found the cedar chest at the foot of my bed and asked what was inside, and I did something I hadn't planned. I took the key from my neck and opened it, and I lifted out my mother's veil, and I set it on that 6-year-old's head, and she wore it through the whole meal, playing bride, trailing ivory tulle past the mashed potatoes while her mother laughed until she cried. Something my mother loved, on the head of a child who owes me nothing, given for free. That's the whole religion of my house now. A card came from my father in December. Store-bought, his handwriting on the inside, a check folded into it. For the trouble. I mailed the check back in a plain envelope. No note. The card I kept. It's in the junk drawer where the chest key used to live. We don't keep score in this house. Not in mine. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, it's a loan. And the day I stopped making payments on a debt I never owed was the day I finally got to keep the one thing my mother left me that no one could ever transfer away, my own name. That's my story. One phone call at 2 a.m., one missing page 14, one door my mother built, and the morning I finally walked through it. If this reminded you to read every page before you sign, or to ask who's watching over what you'll leave behind, take that as your sign and do it this week. Share this with someone who's always fine. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.